when I was at that time traveling under police escort because of threats from the obvious quarter. And after Herema's release, I asked my special branch accompanists, how did this happen? So they said that they believed that this guy knew the whereabouts of the detained men, and they obtained permission to transfer him from one prison to another. And on the way, just as it says there, they took him out of the car and beat the shit out of him, and he then disclosed where Herema was held, and thereby quite possibly saved Herema's life. I know that if some of my colleagues had known about this, they would have called for the punishment of the individuals concerned. I thought on the whole that their intervention, if it saved a life without sacrificing any life, it was justified. So I didn't tell these people anything about it.
Are you in favour of Gardaí beating people up and suspects up in custody generally?
No.
What circumstances are you?
The circumstances were special here. It was a question of saving a life. They did.
But they weren't to know at the time that they would have saved a life thereby. They just beat him up in the hope that he'd tell them something.
No, they knew that the man was in danger of death. He certainly was.
Of course, but they didn't know that the person they were beating up would be able to help them.
Well, they found out he was.
Yes, because they beat him up.
Yes.
So are you in favour then of the Gardaí beating people up that they believe can help them in the saving of lives?
In this particular instance, I think their action was justified. It saved a life, probably saved a life, and didn't take a life.
You write in connection with that the whole government was agreed that no deal should be done with the kidnappers of Herema, and you took some satisfaction in noting that no deal was done.
Yes.
Of course, it's not true. A deal was done.
What?
A deal was done. A deal was done and sentence for both Eddie Gallagher and the woman who was with him, whose name has gone out of my head at this moment. A deal was done, and one of the senior Garda officers involved at the siege of Monasterevin did the deal.
I wasn't aware of that.
It was given wide publicity at the time, and subsequently during the course of the trial of Eddie
Gallagher. A lot of things were given wide publicity which I knew were not true. I don't know whether that is true or not.
Well, it emerged in the court case in the trial of Eddie Gallagher, and nobody contested it at the time. The other issue that I raised was your liberalism, that here you were an exponent of liberalism, widely admired as such in America and elsewhere in the 1960s, and then you were the minister who, in introducing who although, and this is not correctly remembered by people, you liberalised the Broadcasting Act in respect of insofar as only the Oireachtas could dismiss an authority. But you were the person who insisted.
And also that reasons must be given for dismissing an authority or taking action under the Act.
Yes, but you were the minister who was responsible for the enforcement of censorship in the 1970s, and of course that censorship continued until the 1990s. Did you have any qualms about the imposition of censorship?
The exclusion of Sinn Féin from the airwaves?
Yes.
No, I have no qualms at all about that, none whatever. Sinn Féin...
Why did you think that you were in a position to decide what people ought to hear or ought not to hear?
I was in a position to decide that. I was in no position to decide that. I was in a position to propose a measure to the government which I belonged, to get that approved if I could by the government. The government did approve it, and then I put these propositions before the Dáil and Senate, which also approved the measures. So to take this as purely personal to me is wrong. It was personal to me. Yes, it was. Yes. I planned that piece of legislation, believed in it. Let me say why I believed in it. I believed that Sinn Féin, they have no purpose in life other than to be the political and propaganda agencies of an armed conspiracy, that of the Provisional IRA. That being so, to have them on the airwaves is to give satisfaction and a degree of support to their masters, the Provisional IRA. They're always their masters. I wish to deny them that. They were denied it for a time. The act under which they were denied it is still in force. The measures keeping them off the airways, the directives for keeping them off the airways, were withdrawn, and they are now heard practically every hour on the hour on RTE. I don't think that's an improvement, except from the point of view of the IRA. It's very much an improvement from the point of view of the IRA.
If all that was involved was the denial of certain liberties to Republicans who were engaged in these military actions, I think...
And other paramilitaries. Other paramilitaries.
It would have been unexceptional. But of course that isn't the case, because the population at large was also denied getting information which it would otherwise have got. And from the perspective of the population at large, why should they be denied hearing whoever they wish to hear?
Well, first of all, they want to know what the IRA is saying, or what Sinn Féin is saying. They can readily learn it. Sinn Féin
But if they want to hear them say it, why shouldn't they be allowed to hear them say it?
Because it is to the advantage of the IRA that access should be given.
Yes,
and also because the mere fact of their voices being available on the airwaves conveys a message that this is some way normal, that it is normal that the representatives of a paramilitary force should be heard on the state radio.
But
I don't think it is normal.
What you're effectively saying,
I think
though,
it's
is
hideously abnormal.
It would be bad for people to hear this, because they don't have enough sense to make up their own mind about what it is they'd be hearing.
No, it's not that. The point is that if they are allowed, if it had been, remember that since the foundation of this state, these people had been kept off the airwaves, though it had never been accepted, certainly by Fianna Fáil, that they were being kept off. They were being kept off. And now the pressure was on to let them come through. And they were very keen to get that, because it increased their own perceived legitimacy, which is a very powerful force. If they're being heard from on the state radio, it must be somehow all right, and their message of support for the IRA must therefore be all right too. I don't think any of that is all right at all, and that's why I acted as I did.
You've had several careers as a civil servant, as a United Nations representative from the Congo, as an academic, as a politician, and latterly as a journalist. Which of the careers have you enjoyed most?
I think I have what comes most natural to me is writing. Both journalism and books, and I think I've always found more fulfillment in that than anything else. Of course, you can combine the two in the books and in the journalism to an even greater extent. I have been defending political positions in which I believe the positions have changed as I see circumstances changing also.
Which of the books are you proudest of?
Beyond all doubt, the one on Edmund Burke, The Great Melody. I have a great, tremendous admiration for Burke, and the more I got to know about him, the more the admiration increased. I could see an underlying consistency in positions of his which appear to be various. You may say that in that I was looking at myself also, yes. And I won't altogether deny it.
You would, wouldn't you?
Yes.
A lot of people were surprised that you ended up writing for the Irish Independent. You had been editor-in-chief of the Observer, then a columnist of the Observer, then a columnist of the Irish Times. How did you end up in the Irish Independent?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the Irish Times, the first Irish newspaper that employed me to write for them regularly. Douglas Gageby invited me to do that. I knew Douglas didn't like me and didn't approve of my politics. He was much more Republican than I was. But he was a very good professional editor, so I took his invitation as a compliment all the more because I knew of these attitudes. So I just stipulated, there were two stipulations. One, that I would write for them whatever I chose to say, short of infringing the libel laws. And the other was that I should not criticise other contributors to the paper, John Healy being the one principally in mind at the time. So I agreed to those, but then, and wrote quite happily for them. But then the Irish Independent, at I think the instance of Tony O'Reilly, made me an offer to write for them. So I said, well, if I switch to you and you later get tired of me, then I've nobody else to write for except the Irish press, who certainly wouldn't have me even if I would write for them. So then they made me an offer on exactly the same terms, freedom to write anything I wanted to write, that subject only to the law of libel. And they offered me a lot more money. So I accepted that. It was beneficial to me.
Just as an offer you couldn't refuse.
That's right. Well, I could have refused it, but I didn't choose to do so.
You said that John Healy was one of the columnists in the Irish Times that you would have disagreed with. This would have been on the issue of Charles Haughey.
Yes. When I went first into politics and criticised Charles Haughey over a land deal, I was running in the same constituency. I criticised his conduct of the land deal and suggested that his position was corrupt. John Healy wrote two letters, two editorials in the Irish Times, attacking me for this and insinuating that I was jealous of Haughey for having more money than I had, and that was all there was to it. So we were not close friends.
No evidence has ever emerged in the 30 years since then that land deal was corrupt.
Well, evidence has emerged. Certainly you will not dispute that the man was corrupt.
But there's no evidence to support your contention of during the course of that election.
Well,
he was, as you've remarked, he was your party. He was elected for the same constituency as you were, and that was the constituency then of Dublin North East. He got many more votes than you ever did. Why do you think he was so electorally popular?
Partly, but only partly. He threw a lot of money around in the constituency. He had a lot of money from whatever sources, and he did throw it around. I mean, he would go into the Sheaf of Wheat in Coolock, and in an enormous pub, and order drinks for everybody there. And they were quite happy about that. But there was also a feeling that he was a kind of Robin Hood, taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. And also he had a bit of style and dash about him. There was a feeling that, he was somehow a great man, even if a bit bent, and nobody was too reproachful about him being bent. Nobody had a doubt that he was.
Throughout your career, you've been relentless in trying to do him in, and same is true in the book, that you throw everything at him, including responsibility for the Fianna Fáil manifesto of 1977, for which he had no responsibility at all.
How do you know that?
Because I know quite well what happened at the time. He had none. He was excluded from the inner circle that drafted that manifesto, done primarily by Martin O'Donoghue at the time. But yes, it's been established that he's been corrupt, but aren't we all corrupt to some extent or other? Have you ever done anything shady?
We're all miserable sinners.
Have you done anything shady financially in your life? Always paid all your taxes?
Well, I now benefit from a form of tax exemption on literary writing, which was introduced by none other than C.J. Haughey. So I am a beneficiary of his activities.
But that doesn't affect your journalistic writing. Presumably you pay taxes on that.
No.
You don't pay taxes on journalistic writing?
Well, the Revenue Commissioners suggested at one point that I should do that. They first of all did exempt my journalism. Then they showed quite a strong inclination to tax my journalism. I made the case that my journalism, whatever else may be said about it, is on the same level as all the rest of my writing, and that to admit parts of my writing because they appear between boards and exclude the rest because they appear in newspapers would be wrong. And argument on that has continued intermittently over a good many years now. It may, of course, one day be tested in the courts, and then we'll see how it goes. But that's how it is now.
Do I understand you correctly, that you haven't paid any taxes, any income taxes for several years?
What? Well, no, I have paid income tax, but not on my literary earnings.
But you've had no other earnings for several years?
Well, I have other earnings, yes.
What are they?
There are various earnings, yes.
All right. Looking back in your career, what all of us involved in journalism have wounded people and regretted it afterwards. Have you wounded people that you've regretted wounding?
I don't think so, unless I may perhaps have wounded people without being aware that I wounded them. But the ones I regret in a way alienating Noel Browne, but it would have been impossible not to alienate him. I was trying to save him at the time I alienated him. No, I'm not aware that I've...
Have you been wounded?
Wounded would be too much to putting it too strongly. I mean, you have to survive in politics even as long as the 8 years I did. You have to have a fairly thick skin, and I do have a fairly thick skin. And when somebody was out to wound me, as Justin was on the occasion I mentioned, I was bloody annoyed with them. I was angry, but not deeply hurt, and in a way, when I thought about it, partly relieved for not having to be friendly with this guy.
Memoir, My Life in Themes, the autobiography of Conor Cruise O'Brien, is published at the end of this month. Conor, thank you very much for being with us. We'll be back in a moment with the preview of tomorrow's papers.
Thanks very much.